Welcome, incredible people. Before we begin this story that will leave you breathless, I ask you to join our community. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss anything. Now, get ready for a tale that will make you question everything you thought you knew about betrayal and power. A sudden stop in the city. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the busy streets of Park Avenue, reflecting off the clean glass of buildings and imported cars. Inside his black BMW, Liam Hayes moved with the calculated confidence of someone accustomed to controlling his own destiny. That day, every detail had been carefully planned. The most expensive jewel in the city, the impeccably tailored Italian suit, and the rehearsed speech for the marriage proposal the press was eagerly awaiting. On the passenger seat, the small blue velvet box seemed to pulse with the promise of a perfect future. Victoria Vance, his girlfriend of 2 years, was probably already getting ready for dinner, unaware that he was carrying the ring that would make her his wife. The world saw them as a magazine cover couple, and Liam, until that moment, saw no reason to disagree. But then, at a red light on Madison Avenue, something shattered the rehearsed perfection. A discreet movement on the sidewalk caught his attention. His eyes, almost out of habit, turned toward a small corner coffee shop with a simple facade that contrasted with the luxurious stores around it. It was there, through the window, that he saw her, Isabella Carter. Time seemed to slow down. She looked different. Her hair was in a messy bun, a simple apron over a light blouse, and a faint smile as she wiped a table. But it was her, the woman who, 3 years ago, had been both his anchor and his downfall. The woman he loved with an almost terrifying intensity, and who he lost to his pride. Liam barely had time to process the shock before his eyes shifted to a corner of the coffee shop. 2 little girls were playing on a colorful rug, surrounded by small wooden toys. They must have been maybe 3 years old, and when one of them looked up to laugh at something the other said, Liam felt the ground open beneath his feet. The smile, the shape of the face, the arched eyebrow, the same expression he made when he smiled. The air grew heavy. He gripped the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Isabella, who had seemed calm until then, noticed the gaze from outside and froze. The cloth she held fell to the floor, and for a second, there were no customers, no street, no sound. Only 2 gazes, trapped in an unfinished past. The traffic light turned green. Horns began to blare behind him, impatient. But Liam didn't move. Something held him anchored to that moment, unable to simply move on. Every beat of his heart brought with it an avalanche of memories. Her touch, their fights, the last time they saw each other. And now, those girls. Inside him, a phrase formed with the clarity of a gunshot. They are mine. And for the first time, Liam realized that perhaps the entire life he had built could collapse under a single unspoken truth. The car behind him honked again, this time more aggressively. But Liam remained motionless. It was as if the sound of the street had been muffled by an invisible pane of glass. He could only see Isabella and the 2 girls. The entire world was reduced to that simple, devastating scene. His breathing became shallow. The air seemed too heavy to enter his lungs. They could be my daughters. The phrase resonated endlessly, and each repetition hurt more. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew he recognized that trait in their gaze, that curious and attentive way. It was like seeing himself in a photograph, but in miniature. His hands were sweating, and a slight tremor ran through his fingers. The past began to invade his mind forcefully. He remembered their last fight. Isabella with tears in her eyes, asking him to accompany her to a doctor's appointment. He remembered replying that he couldn't, that the bank merger he was leading was crucial, that there were millions at stake. He remembered the way she looked at him that day, not with anger, but with a silent weariness that seemed to say, I understand my place on your priority list now." And then she left, without screaming, without drama. She just disappeared. He, too proud and busy, didn't go looking for her. Deep down, he believed that if she had wanted to, she would have come back. Now, seeing those girls, he understood what she had carried alone, and what he had never bothered to find out. Isabella, inside the cafe, also seemed paralyzed. She didn't come closer. She didn't smile. She didn't greet him. She just stared at him with a mixture of surprise and protection. Yes, that was it. Protection. As if, even after 3 years, she still felt she needed to stand between him and something valuable. And that something now had faces, names, and laughter. Liam realized his body was leaning forward, as if an instinct were pushing him toward them. But another instinct, fear, kept him glued to the car seat. He didn't know if he wanted answers or if he was afraid of receiving them. One of the customers in the coffee shop gestured, calling Isabella over. She looked away, bent down to pick up the dropped cloth, and, as if trying to end the moment, turned her back. But before she disappeared completely from his sight, Liam saw one of the girls run toward her, laughing. The traffic light turned red again, and this time, Liam didn't wait. He turned on his signal, pulled the car over a few feet ahead, and stood there, staring at the facade of the cafe. His heart was beating fast, but not with ordinary anxiety. It was something else, something deeper. It was the feeling of being at a point of no return. He knew that if he crossed that door, nothing in his life would ever be the same. But he also knew that if he left, he would be running from a truth that was already beginning to settle in like a permanent shadow. For a long minute, he remained like that, hands firm on the steering wheel, trying to gather the courage to cross the minimal distance that separated him from an unfinished past and a future he didn't even know if he had the right to claim. The unspoken truth. The sound of the bell above the door announced his entry. A soft aroma of freshly ground coffee mixed with the sweet smell of pastries. Liam took a few steps, feeling the wooden floor creak under his impeccably shined shoes. Everything there seemed too simple for him, and, paradoxically, more real than any boardroom he had ever set foot in. Isabella was behind the counter, stacking plates. When she heard the bell, she looked up and stopped. For an instant, her expression became unreadable, as if she were searching her memory for the last time she had seen him. Then, her gaze hardened. "Liam," was all she said, in a low, almost whispered tone. He stopped in front of her, keeping his eyes fixed on her face. He didn't know where to begin. He didn't know if he should ask, accuse, or simply apologize. But before he could speak, one of the girls let out a laugh in the corner, playing with her sister. The sound seemed to cut the air between them. Liam looked away and directed his gaze toward the two little ones. The braver of the two noticed the stranger and stopped playing, observing him with curiosity. His heart quickened. "Are they?" he began, but his voice failed him. He swallowed, trying to steady it. "Are they mine?" Isabella didn't answer. She remained motionless, only gripping a plate hard enough for her knuckles to turn white. The silence between them stretched, and in that silence, there was more truth than in any verbal confirmation. "Mia, Lily, come to Mommy," Isabella said, calling the girls softly, but without taking her eyes off him. Lily obeyed, but Mia, the more intrepid spirit, walked up to Liam. He knelt down to her level, almost without thinking, and found his own reflection in her small eyes. "Who are you?" the girl asked, with the disarming purity of a child. Liam managed a smile that was more pain than joy. "Someone who," he hesitated, feeling a lump in his throat, "might be very important to you." Isabella came closer and took Mia in her arms, pulling her away. The way she did it was not harsh, but it raised an invisible barrier. "I don't know what you came here for, Liam," she said firmly, "but my life is different now." He took a deep breath. Your life or ours? The question hung in the air, as if the coffee itself had paused to listen. Isabella looked away, holding her daughter tightly against her chest, and Liam understood that the answers he was looking for would not come so easily. A past to confront. Liam left the coffee shop with slow, almost faltering steps. The sound of the door's bell still echoed in his mind, mixed with Isabella's sharp words and little Mia's inquisitive gaze. The street looked the same as always. Cars passing, people talking. But for him, everything had changed. It was as if he had left one world and entered another, one where his certainties were worth nothing. The evening air was colder than he remembered. He walked to his car, but didn't get in. Instead, he stood by the door, looking at his reflection in the glass. A man in an expensive suit, with well-styled hair, but with a tired and lost expression. For the first time in a long time, he didn't recognize himself in that image. "They are mine." The phrase hammered in his head without rest, and with it came memories he would rather have buried. The day he chose a meeting over Isabella, the calls he ignored, the pride that kept him from looking for her. Now, each of those decisions seemed like a domino that had led him there. He got in the car, but didn't start the engine. His phone vibrated in his pocket, and Victoria's name lit up the screen. For a moment, he thought about answering, about telling her everything. But no, there were no words that could explain what was happening without first being certain of the truth. He put the phone back in his pocket, as if he could postpone the inevitable. Meanwhile, the image of Isabella holding her daughters wouldn't leave his mind. There was pride in her posture, but also a weight on her shoulders. He knew her well enough to realize that she was protecting the girls from something, or someone, and the thought that he might be the one she wanted to protect them from hit him hard. Liam started the car and drove aimlessly, leaving the streets of Park Avenue behind. He passed through less lit neighborhoods until he parked on a quiet street. He rested his forehead on the steering wheel and let an uncomfortable thought form. If they are my daughters, how many birthdays, how many first steps, how many hugs did I miss? The pain of that realization was accompanied by another, even more disturbing question. And what if they aren't mine? Because, in that case, it would mean Isabella had moved on, that another man had taken the place he didn't want. A tightness in his chest made him realize that, regardless of the answer, he was already trapped in that past again. There was no going back to his old life, to the planned engagement, to the social events and business dinners. Victoria, the banking empire, the flawless image. None of it seemed to matter in the face of what was at stake now. Leaning back in the seat, Liam closed his eyes and asked himself the question he didn't want to face. How did we get here? The answer was somewhere in the past, and he knew he would have to revisit it, no matter how painful, to understand the present. It was in that moment, alone in the car, that he decided he needed to know the whole truth, even if it meant reopening wounds that never healed. The beginning of the end 3 years earlier, New York City pulsed with its chaotic rhythm. Liam Mason, at 32, was already a known figure in the financial sector. With a schedule that barely allowed him to breathe, he was accustomed to timed meetings, business lunches, and decisions that moved millions. That night, however, he was reluctantly dragged by a colleague to a photography exhibition at a community cultural center in Greenwich Village. He wasn't interested in art. For Liam, paintings were just investments, and sculptures were status symbols. But when he entered the space, lit by warm lights and surrounded by soft music, his eyes stopped at a scene that wasn't hanging on the wall, but walking among the people. Isabella Carter was adjusting a tripod, focused on preparing her camera to photograph the event. She wore her hair down, a simple white blouse, and jeans, but there was something about her that was outside of any pattern Liam knew. She wasn't just pretty. She had an energy that seemed to light up the place without asking for permission. He watched her for a few minutes, intrigued by the way she talked to the guests, laughing naturally, without being shy in front of anyone. Liam, who lived surrounded by people who calculated every gesture and word, found that all almost disconcerting. When he finally approached, he started with his full name, expecting immediate recognition. Isabella, however, just smiled and said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Isabella. Can you hold this for a second?" and bent down to photograph an older woman who was smiling in front of a painting. That lack of urgency to impress him was, for Liam, like a blow to the ego and, at the same time, an invitation to stay there. When she stood up again, he asked her about the photos, and to his surprise, Isabella spoke with genuine enthusiasm. She told him about the project that portrayed workers from the outskirts of the city, about her passion for recording real stories, and about how she was saving up to open her own studio. Liam realized that, for the first time in a long time, he was listening to someone talk about dreams that had nothing to do with profits or numbers, and that, to him, was something new. At the end of the night, Liam offered to give her a ride home. Isabella refused, saying she preferred to take the subway. He insisted, arguing that it would be safer, but she smiled and said, "It's not about safety. It's that I like to watch people on their way home. There's always a story happening." That phrase stuck in his mind. In that instant, Liam understood that Isabella saw the world differently, and it was precisely that difference that, in the following days, made him seek her out again, and that would end up being, years later, both the force that united them and the barrier that separated them. At first, everything seemed perfect. Liam, with his charm and almost unlimited resources, opened doors for Isabella that she had never imagined crossing. Dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, unexpected trips to destinations she only knew from magazines, and expensive gifts wrapped in impeccable bows. Isabella, accustomed to a simple life, was amazed. Not by the luxury itself, but by the way Liam made her feel special. In the first few months, their relationship was an explosion, and he made sure to be present at the most important events for her. Isabella, in turn, took him to photo shoots in working-class neighborhoods, independent artist presentations, and small hidden cafes, showing him a side of the city Liam had never explored. But little by little, his schedule began to override everything. Meetings that invaded weekends, last-minute business trips, endless calls in the middle of a romantic dinner. Isabella tried to be understanding. After all, she knew his career was demanding. But each absence left a small, invisible crack. Liam, accustomed to measuring his worth by professional achievements, believed that all that effort was to guarantee their financial security. What he failed to realize was that for Isabella, security didn't mean full bank accounts, but rather presence, attention, and sharing everyday life. Their arguments began subtly, first over a canceled lunch, then over a trip that coincided with her birthday. Over time, the fights began to involve deeper issues about the meaning of their relationship. Love, passion, desire, and moments of tenderness still existed, but they were always interrupted by the constant shadow of his priorities. Isabella tried to convince herself that it was just a phase, that when Liam's banking empire stabilized, he could finally slow down. He, on the other hand, saw success as a fortress he believed he was building to protect her, without realizing that she was feeling more and more distant from that fortress. Liam didn't understand how something so solid could be so fragile at the same time. But the cracks were there, silent, waiting for the moment when their love would face the very essence of who they were. Isabella found out she was pregnant on a random morning before heading out to photograph an arts and crafts fair. The pharmacy test, bought discreetly on the way home the night before, showed 2 clear lines. She stared at it for a long time, filled with both joy and uncertainty. She sat on the edge of the bed and gently caressed her belly. She imagined Liam's smile, the way he would react to the news that he would be a father. Despite the differences and problems that had been arising, she believed that this news could bring them back together. She spent the day rehearsing the perfect way to tell him, but in the late afternoon, she received a text from him. "Meeting with the board late. Don't wait up." Isabella sighed and saved the idea for the next day. When she finally managed to find him, Liam was at a restaurant, with 3 executives discussing the details of a bank merger that could consolidate his empire in Latin America. She watched him from afar for a few seconds, seeing the charts on his laptop screen and the numbers in their conversations. When she approached the table, he stood up to kiss her quickly and introduced her to his colleagues. Isabella, trying to maintain a light tone, said, "We need to talk about something important." Liam, still looking at the documents, replied, "Of course, my love, but can it be later? We're at a crucial point. This merger has to close." A knot formed in her stomach. Later. It was always later, but she still tried. "Is it really that urgent, Liam? Is it about us?" He looked up for a brief moment, only to smile mechanically. "And what's about us can't wait for me to close this deal. I promise it will be worth it." The promise sounded empty to Isabella. That conversation, which should have been a milestone of happiness, dissolved between numbers and contracts. She backed away. She didn't want to compete with the world he had chosen as his priority. That night, lying in bed alone, she realized that she might raise this baby in a very different way than she had imagined. The future that once seemed like a joint effort was beginning to feel like a solo journey. And without realizing it, the silence she decided to keep would be the first brick in the wall that would eventually separate them forever. The last fight and a new beginning. The day of their last fight didn't start like a battlefield. In fact, it started like any other. Liam left for work early, and Isabella woke up to the distant sound of his car engine. But that morning, something already weighed in the air. An accumulation of small absences, unspoken words, and postponed promises. Isabella had scheduled an important doctor's appointment. It wasn't just a checkup. It was the first ultrasound of her pregnancy. She texted him early, asking him to try to be there. Liam replied with a dry, "I can't make it. Investor meeting." There was no elaborate excuse or apology, just a dry statement of fact. When he returned home, late that night, Isabella was sitting on the sofa with the lights low. Liam, exhausted, put his briefcase on the floor and went to the kitchen without noticing the heavy atmosphere. "Can we talk now?" Her voice was calm, but filled with a contained tension. He sighed, pouring himself a glass of water. "Now, Isa, I had a hellish day." "Precisely now," she replied firmly, "because it's not just today, Liam. It's the contracts, the mergers, and never us." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You knew from the beginning that my life was like this. I work to secure our future." "Our future?" She let out a short, bitter laugh. "What kind of future is it where I spend my nights alone, holding news you don't want to hear?" He frowned and slammed the glass down. Isabella stood up and picked up the envelope from the table. To be dramatic would be to say, "I still believe you're going to change. This right here is reality." And she walked out of the room before he could understand. Isabella was already in the bedroom, closing a small suitcase. "What are you doing?" he asked, confused. "Choosing the only thing I can still control," she replied without looking at him. She was out the door, leaving behind not just the apartment, but also a man who, in her opinion, had chosen everything but her. Liam stood still, believing it was just another intense fight, and that she would be back in a few days. He didn't know that, along with the suitcase, Isabella was taking a secret that would forever change the course of his life. Interactive question. What do you think of Isabella's decision to leave without telling him she was pregnant? Do you think she was right? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. The path of a single mother, the image of Isabella in the coffee shop, and the two girls playing in the corner wouldn't leave his mind. The next few hours were a blur. He canceled appointments, turned off his phone to avoid Victoria's calls, and locked himself in his apartment, sitting on the living room sofa, replaying every detail of that unexpected encounter. Early the next morning, he decided he needed answers. He wasn't going to show up at the coffee shop again, but he could find out more through other means. He called one of his trusted assistants, someone accustomed to handling discreet investigations about competitors and investments. I need you to find out everything you can about Isabella Carter, her address, financial situation, work history, and, if possible, about the girls. His voice was firm, but the assistant noticed an unusual hesitation. I need her not to find out. The information began to arrive in a few hours. Isabella lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, in a modest but well-kept building. She worked 2 shifts, morning and afternoon at the coffee shop, and at night doing freelance photo editing. There was no record of any lawsuit. Both girls had been registered only with their mother's last name, Carter. Liam stared at the printed report on the table. Why hadn't she looked for him? Why did she choose to raise 2 girls alone without asking him for a penny? Was it pride, fear, or a pure conviction that he didn't deserve to be in their lives? On an impulse, he drove to her neighborhood and watched from a distance. He saw Isabella arriving with the girls, holding her hands, both laughing at something their mom was saying. There was no luxury, but there was a joy he didn't remember seeing when they were together. When Mia stumbled and fell, Liam almost got out of the car, but he stopped when he saw Isabella kneel down. There was a tenderness that squeezed his chest. Back in the car, he realized that he wasn't just dealing with the possibility of being a father, but with the certainty that he had lost years he could never get back. Every day away from them was a piece of history that wouldn't return. It was at that moment that a certainty formed. He could no longer watch from afar. Isabella's life began even before the sun rose. The alarm would go off at 5 in the morning, and she, still groggy, would get up carefully so as not to wake the girls. She would make coffee, prepare a quick breakfast for Mia and Lily, and pack their lunches. Before 6, they were already on their way, all 3 holding hands, crossing narrow streets and passing by neighbors who always greeted them with a smile. It was a simple neighborhood, but full of strong bonds, people who helped each other and, in a way, also helped raise the girls. After dropping her daughters off at daycare, Isabella would serve customers, wipe tables, and help in the kitchen when needed. There was no glamour, just honest and exhausting work. Even so, she maintained a genuine smile, especially when a regular customer asked about the girls. In the afternoon, after her shift, she would return to pick them up. They would always be greeted with tight hugs, and Mia would want to sing a song she had learned. Isabella listened to everything as if each detail were a gift. At home, the routine didn't stop. She would cook dinner, bathe the girls, and when they were finally asleep, she would turn on her old computer to work on her photo editing. These were extra hours that ensured a little more money at the end of the month, money that went to pay the electricity bill or fix a persistent leak in the kitchen. There was no one to share the burden with. She faced nights of fever alone. Birthdays were organized with savings and improvisation. Difficult decisions were made without advice. Isabella had learned to be both a mother and a father, to be present all the time, even when her body craved rest. Despite everything, she didn't have a plan for her future. Isabella made sure of that, even if it meant giving up personal dreams, professional opportunities, or, many times, herself. From the outside, Liam observed parts of that routine in silence, unseen. He had never imagined Isabella in that setting. To him, she was always the independent woman with artistic projects. Now, he saw someone who had been completely transformed, and that transformation had the faces and smiles of two little girls. What disturbed him most wasn't the material hardship she faced, but the realization that, even without him, she had managed to create a home full of life and affection. And in silence, he returned home that night with a weight in his chest he had never felt before. It wasn't the pressure of a multi-million-dollar contract or the tension of a difficult negotiation. It was something more intimate, more corrosive. For the first time, he realized the size of the void he had left in Isabella's life. He had always believed that providing material security was enough. Now, he understood that for Isabella, security meant knowing he would be there, in body and soul. In the following days, he tried to get closer. He came to the coffee shop more often, but Isabella didn't make it easy. She remained professional, distant, as if every word was a reminder of old memories. When he tried to start a conversation, she would respond curtly and immediately walk away to serve another customer. This barrier both irritated and challenged him. Liam had never had difficulty getting what he wanted, whether it was a business deal, an investment, or a person. But with Isabella now, everything was different. It was no longer about seduction or promises, and he knew that he had broken her. Still, there was something inside him that refused to back down. His pride. A part of him still believed he could solve the situation, as he did in business, with strategy, persistence, and control. The problem was, Isabella was not a contract to be signed. One afternoon, he tried to talk more openly. "Isabella, I know I was wrong. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. I'm not going to just stand by while He hesitated. "While those girls grow up, without knowing who I am." She sighed, but her gaze remained hard. "It's not just about knowing who you are, Liam. It's about knowing if you can be counted on." The words resonated in his mind. Deep down, he knew the answer was more than he would like to admit. Interactive question. Do you think Isabella will ever forgive Liam? What does being able to be counted on mean to her? The path to forgiveness. Victoria was used to a Liam who was always available for her whims. Impromptu trips to Cancun, dinners at the most expensive restaurants, and flawless appearances at gala events. But in recent weeks, he had become absent, distracted, with a look that seemed to be somewhere else. And that place, she knew, was Isabella and the girls. But when she questioned him, he responded with evasions, saying he was dealing with personal matters and that everything would soon return to normal. But when the absences became more frequent, Victoria lost her patience. "I don't know what's going on with you, Liam," she said, entering his office unannounced. "But I'm not a woman to be kept on the back burner. It's something I need to resolve." "It's not about me?" she asked, with an incredulous eyebrow raised. "Everything has always been about you and me. We're the perfect couple, and now you want to throw all that away. Why?" The tone of her voice revealed more than jealousy. It was fear, not of losing Liam as a man, but of losing the status that came with him. "It's true," he replied without raising his voice. Victoria laughed, but the sound was hollow. "And what is true, Liam? A waitress with two girls who might not even be yours. Is that what's got you like this?" The cruelty of her words hit him hard, not just because of the way she referred to Isabella, but because it made it clear that the love she claimed to feel was conditional. He just observed her for a few seconds, as if seeing her for the first time without the filter of appearances. And for the first time, he didn't see the partner he thought he had chosen. He saw only a woman who saw him as a stepping stone. "Victoria, maybe it's better if you think about what you really want," he said coldly, "because I've already started doing that." The conversation ended there. Liam knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. The myth they sold to the world, the unbeatable, elegant, and envied couple, had crumbled. And strangely, he felt more relief than pain. Liam knew he couldn't invade Isabella's life and the girls' lives abruptly. If he wanted to earn a place there, he would need to enter slowly, with measured steps. That's why he began to frequent the coffee shop at different times, always ordering something simple like a black coffee, sometimes a slice of cake, and staying just long enough to be noticed, but not to be a nuisance. At first, Isabella attended to him with formality. There was no warmth or explicit coldness, just the safe distance of someone who didn't want to open up for conversations. But the girls, particularly Mia, began to react to his presence with curiosity. One afternoon, while Liam was waiting for his order, Lily dropped a small teddy bear on the floor. He bent down, picked up the toy, and handed it to her with a smile. "I think someone left a friend behind." Lily, shy, took the bear and mumbled an almost inaudible, "Thank you." Mia, with a drawing in her hands, a colorful scribble with figures that were barely distinguishable, said, "That's you," pointing to a little stick figure in a suit next to two smaller figures. The gesture squeezed Liam's heart. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket as if it were something precious. Small conversations began to emerge, a comment about the weather, a question about the girls' school, a compliment on the coffee shop's chocolate cake. Isabella, although not encouraging the chats, no longer shut them down. Perhaps she realized that, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't completely control her daughter's curiosity. One Saturday morning, Liam appeared at the coffee shop with a jar of homemade cookies. He didn't know how to cook, but he had asked his housekeeper to prepare his favorite childhood recipe. He handed the jar to the girls, and seeing Mia and Lily with their mouths full, he felt a joy he didn't remember ever experiencing. These moments, though small, began to create a kind of bridge. He wasn't a dad yet, and maybe he didn't even have the right to be, but he was no longer just a stranger. For Liam, that connection was a reminder that true bonds couldn't be bought, rushed, or forced. They had to be earned. The invitation came unexpectedly. While Liam was having coffee at his table, Mia animatedly commented on the community fair that was happening in their neighborhood. Lily, more timid, added that there would be lots of sweets and music. Isabella gave him a cautious look, but said nothing. Liam seized the opportunity. "Can I go?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The girls smiled, and Isabella, after a brief silence, replied, "It's an open party. If you want to show up, it's at your own risk." On Saturday, Liam arrived in the neighborhood just before sunset. The streets were adorned with colorful banners, and an irresistible aroma of roasted corn and churros filled the air. Children ran through the streets. He felt out of place for the first few minutes. There were no white-gloved waiters or minimalist decorations. Everything there was improvised, handmade, but vibrated with life. People he had never seen before greeted him with a wave, as if accepting him immediately just for being there. He found Isabella near a punch stall, helping her mother, who was making the traditional drink. He didn't ignore him, just commented, "Be careful. Don't burn yourself. Here, if you spill something, you clean it up." Liam smiled, and to her surprise, took a cloth and started helping, serving drinks and clearing empty cups. The children, curious, would approach him to ask for more popcorn or to show him a toy. Mia pulled him along and took him to play. Liam felt less like a visitor and more like a part of something. The music, the informal conversations, the neighbors looking out for each other. It was a world that didn't measure value in numbers, but in gestures. When night fell, he sat in a corner with a plate of tamales, watching Isabella dance with her daughters in her arms. There was no amount of money that could buy that. It was in that instant that a simple but overwhelming thought occurred to him. Maybe the true luxury was precisely this life he had always ignored. A new family. In the days that followed the fair, Isabella was surprised to find herself replaying scenes she didn't want to admit to. Liam helping serve punch, genuinely laughing with the girls, kneeling down to tie Mia's shoelace without anyone asking him to. These were images that didn't fit the man she had known, or at least not the man she had decided to leave behind. She knew Liam was capable of grand gestures, expensive gifts, and rehearsed declarations, but what she was seeing now was different. There was no ostentation, no audience. It was simple, but his sincerity was what most confused her. At the coffee shop, he still showed up. Not every day, but enough for the girls to start waiting for him. Mia always asked if her friend would come, and Lily, though more reserved, would give a shy smile when he walked in. Isabella realized how much he had changed when Liam appeared soaking wet, without an umbrella, just to hand each of the girls a new jacket. He said he had seen the weather forecast and didn't want them to get sick. Isabella hesitated, but accepted, thanking him with a nod. He didn't stay, just left the gifts and went. This type of quiet gesture was what was slowly tearing down her walls. Still, Isabella remembered how painful it was to depend on him and end up disappointed. In a quick conversation while cleaning a table, she said, "It's no use for you to show up now as if nothing happened." He replied without arrogance, "I know what happened, and I know I caused it. I don't expect you to forget, but I can't be an outsider now." The sincerity in his tone disarmed her for a second, but she quickly recomposed herself, like someone closing a door that was opened by mistake. It was still too soon to believe. Still, when Liam left that afternoon, Isabella realized she was smiling to herself, and that more than any words, scared her. The fear reached its peak one late night. On the other end of the line, the coordinator of the community daycare sounded distraught. Mia had woken up with a high fever and difficulty breathing during a school camping trip. She was being taken to the hospital. Isabella's heart raced. She got dressed quickly, took Lily in her arms, who was crying, scared without understanding what was happening, and, without thinking, called Liam. She didn't really know why she did it, maybe because at that moment, she couldn't think of anyone else who could help. He answered on the first ring. Her voice, trembling, was enough for him to grab his keys and leave without changing his clothes. He arrived at the hospital almost at the same time as they did. Without arguing, he took the lead and held Isabella's hand tightly, as if that connection was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Lily, in her father's lap, watched the closed door with teary eyes. Not understanding what was happening, the minutes felt like hours. Finally, the doctor appeared and explained that Mia had a severe bronchitis attack, worsened by the cold, and would need to be admitted. Isabella took a deep breath, feeling the tears fall as Liam put an arm around her in a protective gesture. When they were finally able to enter the room, they found Mia drowsy, connected to a nebulizer. Isabella sat next to her daughter, stroking her hair, while Liam held her little hand. For a moment, they looked at each other with the shared fear of loss. During that night, they took turns staying awake. Liam got coffee for Isabella, adjusted Lily's blanket, and even offered to sleep in the chair next to Mia's bed. There were no arguments, no resentments, no pride there, just two parents taking care of their child. At dawn, when the doctor confirmed that Mia could go home, Isabella looked at Liam and said, "Thank you." He didn't respond with words, just nodded. But inside him, something was solidifying. No matter what it cost, he would not be a bystander in their lives again. The morning after the hospital scare was strangely quiet. Isabella was making coffee in the kitchen, while Mia rested on the sofa, still fragile. Liam stood in the doorway, feeling a weight in his chest that was not just exhaustion. He knew this moment had to come. He couldn't keep getting closer without confronting the past. So he took a deep breath and walked to the table, waiting for Isabella to turn around and face him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice deeper than he intended. She sighed, her arms crossed like someone preparing for a battle. "Well, talk." Liam was silent for a few seconds, choosing his words carefully. "I was a coward." The phrase came out dry but was loaded with truth. "When you tried to tell me you needed me, I was blind. I believed I could make up for it later." Isabella kept her gaze firm, but he noticed the slight trembling in her fingers. "You made your decisions, Liam. I made mine." "I know," he continued, "and that's why I'm not here to ask you to forget. I don't deserve an easy forgiveness, but I want to take on everything I should have taken on from the beginning. You know what they say. Being a dad is the most important role in life." The silence between them seemed to stretch for minutes. Mia coughed slightly on the sofa, and they both looked at their daughter, remembering the fear of the night before. "It's not that simple," Isabella said finally. "It's not enough to just show up and say you want to be here. You have to prove it, not out of pride, not to ease your guilt, but because you love them." Liam looked away, and he realized there were tears in her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the first real crack in the barriers she had built. In the days that followed the conversation, Isabella maintained a cautious air, but Liam noticed that something had changed. It wasn't an open invitation, but it was no longer a closed door, and for him, that was progress. The first step came discreetly. One morning, Isabella called him to say she couldn't pick up Mia and Lily from daycare because she had a meeting with a photography client. Before she could explain further, Liam offered to help. Isabella was hesitant, but she finally accepted. That afternoon was simple, but significant. Liam arrived early, waited outside, and saw the girls run out, shouting his name. Mia hugged his leg tightly, and Lily, more timid, took his hand. The ride home was filled with stories from school and family. From then on, Liam's presence became a constant. He took them to the doctor, bought them school supplies, and cooked them breakfast when he visited on weekends. Nothing grand, but always with consistency. And for Isabella, that was what really mattered. Still, she set clear boundaries. There were no public displays of affection between them, and after putting the girls to bed, Isabella and Liam would sit in the kitchen, drinking tea. The silence was no longer heavy as before. It was almost comfortable. "You've changed," she said, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "It's not a change," he replied without hesitation. "It's who I was supposed to be from the beginning." The conversation ended there, but there was a quiet understanding that a new chapter had begun. Little by little, the moments of the four of them together began to feel natural. Walks in the park, movie nights at home, grocery trips, things Liam would never have imagined doing before, but which now became his most cherished moments. He knew he didn't have her forgiveness yet, but he had something that, for him, was just as valuable. Her trust. A story of second chances. 6 months later, the transformation in Liam and Isabella's lives was visible to those who knew them, and more importantly, to themselves. There was no rush, no empty promises, just a slow and consistent building of something that, this time, had deep roots. It was Liam who proposed marriage, not in a luxurious restaurant or on a special Saturday. But while they were walking through the park where they used to take the girls, they were sitting on the grass, watching Mia and Lily chase butterflies, when he pulled a small box from his pocket. "Isabella," he said in a serene voice, "I've wasted a lot of time trying to be the man the world expected. Now, I just want to be the man you all need. Will you marry me?" She looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise, emotion, and slight disbelief. Then, she smiled in a way he hadn't seen in years and replied, "Yes, but only because you still dance worse than anyone I know." The wedding was held right there, weeks later, in the same park. There were no magazine photographers or high society guests, just close friends and neighbors who had become part of this new life. Mia and Lily carried the rings on a simple lace pillow, laughing all the time. Isabella wore a simple dress that seemed made for her, and Liam a suit without a tie. The setting was a sunny afternoon, with the sound of trees swaying in the wind and the distant singing of children playing. When the justice of the peace arrived for the ceremony, Liam felt that he was not signing a contract, but a living commitment to be present, to listen, to protect, to love. Isabella, as she took his hand, knew there was no guarantee of perfection, but there was a certainty of effort. After the ceremony, everyone shared an improvised picnic of homemade bread and other treats. Liam sat at the wooden table, looking at Mia and Lily, now 8 years old, chatting animatedly about a school project. Isabella walked through the kitchen, putting away the girls' backpacks, and the sound of laughter filled the air in a way that no boardroom of his old life could offer. He had done it with what truly mattered. And looking at his daughters, Liam thought about how dangerously close he had come to losing everything, not due to bad luck, but to decisions that, in the past, he believed were the right ones. The coffee shop, Cafe of Memories, was no longer just a small place in Park Avenue. With his support and Isabella's vision, it was a franchise that employed single mothers who needed an opportunity. Each branch had the essence of the first, with a children's corner and a warm atmosphere that welcomed stories of overcoming adversity. For Liam, this business was not about profits. It was a symbol, a way of giving back to the world, something he had learned with Isabella. He would mingle with customers, chat with employees, and listen to their stories. He didn't need titles or deference. Seeing a sincere smile was enough to feel he was in the right place. At home, the routine was simple. He would take the girls to school, help Isabella with her photography projects, and on Saturday nights, they would just watch a movie together, things he would have considered a waste of time before, but which were now his most precious moments. One afternoon, sitting in the garden while watching Mia and Lily play, Isabella approached and intertwined her fingers with his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, smiling. "I'm thinking about how true love isn't something you find, but something you build every day, and how dangerously close I came to not deserving it." Isabella smiled, but didn't reply, just rested her head on his shoulder, sharing that comfortable silence that for both of them said more than any words. Liam knew that life wasn't perfect. There were still difficult days, worries, and unforeseen events. But deep down, he understood that he had finally found his home. He invited you to leave your opinion about this incredible story in the comments. If you liked it, share it, and subscribe to the channel to support our work. Another story is appearing on your screen that will probably also move you, so don't miss it.